After a week in the Me Too area exploring the Rio Guapes, we are heading northwest into the Llanos, where we will spend a few days exploring the rivers that pour out of the Andes near Villavicencio, and also drive east deep into the Llanos to the border area between the states of Meta and Vachada in search of a special fish. The Colombia 2018 trip took place over a 2-week period in January. Each week was organized as a unique excursion, and not everyone took part in both trips. The starting and ending point for all these expeditions is Bogota, which we were returning to at the end of the trip to Mitu. And while there is a lot of fun to be had in Bogota, if you can get through the traffic, our first priority was to meet the fish we collected in Mitu at Hernando's export house and get them into holding tanks where they will stay for a week or more before being shipped to the USA.
I'll leave your photo tank up here.
That looks like the ones I bought last year in Arid that never got to me.
Hernando's facility is small, but typical of an export warehouse in Bogota. It is not designed to hold a lot of fish or to hold them for a long period of time. Most exporters here, Hernando included, take orders for fish from all over the world, buy them from a variety of sources, including collectors, aggregators who buy fish from collectors, and even other exporters, and box them up as soon as they have them all to send them to their final destination. The export fish rooms are in Bogota, a long way from where the fish are collected all over the country. Once the fish get here, they are usually already on their way out. Exporting fish from Colombia is a tough, highly competitive business. Hernando competes for customers, but he also has to compete for fish. And he has to deal with a complex bureaucracy with challenging laws and more than a bit of corruption that favors large exporters over smaller. We are fortunate to have a guide who is also a knowledgeable collector, has access to a wide network of sources of fish, and is a very capable exporter. It is not legal for a visitor to Colombia to collect fish without a licensed collector being present, like Hernando, or to take fish out of the country without an export license. So we depend upon Hernando not only to take us out to find and catch fish, but also to transport those fish back to Bogota and then hold them until we get home and then export them to us in the USA. Without someone like Hernando, these trips for collecting fish would be impossible. Saturday is transition day. 3 members of our group are going home and 4 new members are arriving. A good portion of the day is spent getting ready for the next week, but we also take some time to enjoy Bogota, which really is a very cool place to spend a couple days. Early Sunday morning, we are on our way for week 2. Today, we will drive through the eastern range of the Andes to our base accommodations in the city of Villavicencio. There is a main highway between Bogota and Villavicencio, and on a good day you could make that trip in about 3 hours. But the scenic route over the high passes is prettier and much more interesting. This route also gives you the best view of the city of Bogota, a truly spectacular sight. One of the largest cities in South America, one of the largest cities in the world. In this part of Colombia, the prevailing winds are from east to west, so the western slope of this range is relatively dry, and the temperature gets cooler the higher we climb. See those clouds in the distance? That is the top of the mountain, and when we cross over to the eastern side, the air will be much more humid. It is not quite a cloud forest there, but it is much more lush. Check out all these epiphytic plants on one roadside tree.
All the different lichens, orchids, lichens, ferns, bromeliads. Just crazy.
Today will be our only chance to have any experience in the higher elevations on this trip, so we make the time to find a quiet road to walk along, look at the diversity of plants, and do a bit of birding. One week before we arrived in Colombia, one of the huge suspension bridges being built for the new highway between Bogota and Villavicencio collapsed. The bridge was not complete, but workers were killed. Villavicencio is a much smaller city than Bogota, but it is the largest city east of the Andes Mountains. This city is the gateway to the Llanos, one of the most important agricultural regions in South America. The culture here is similar to an internal western city in the USA, somewhat cosmopolitan with more than a little llanero flair. A llanero is a Colombian cowboy. Our base of operations for the first few days here in Villavicencio is this very nice compound with new buildings, a pool, covered patio, and well-maintained grounds behind a tall wall and locked gate. The price included cooks to prepare our meals. Overall, this was a comfortable place and about the same cost as a hotel and eating in restaurants. Early Monday morning, we are on the road for a day of fish collecting. Today's trip will take us southwest, parallel to the foothills of the Andes Mountains and into the Rio Ariari drainage, which eventually joins the Orinoco through the Rio Guaviare at Arid. Our goal is to reach the Rio Guaviare while the sun is high. This is a fast, clear water river that should be great for filming, so long as it hasn't rained. But for hardcore fish collectors who have not gotten a net wet in 3 days, a 3-hour drive without stopping may be a bit too much to ask, but we know just the place to take the edge off their withdrawals. Just south of Villavicencio is a small riverside community with a rain runoff gutter across the street from their houses that is full of a pretty green rivula species killifish. This spot never disappoints. You ever been fishing and noticed that when one fisherman catches a fish, that spot tends to get a little crowded? I think this is probably the most collected killie ditch in the Llanos. I know that we have stopped here several times over the years. At least for a rivulist, it is kind of pretty. For pike cichlid bait. That ditch is literally at the first bridge over a river on the trip, and what we see is encouraging. The water is low. A year before, this river was raging. The landscape in this part of the Llanos is rolling hills with broad, wet meadows between streams. The trees grow along the waterways, and during the rainy season, everything is wet, but in the dry season, it gets very hot. Most of the fields in this area are used to raise cattle. We made it to the Rio Guayara access point at about noon, shortly followed by a series of technical errors in which I first managed to accidentally start the record on my camera, so that when I tried to start recording, I actually stopped the camera, and vice versa. I have lots of great footage of the ground bouncing around as we walk. But I do have still shots of this beautiful, clear, shallow, fast-flowing river. And I figured out my mistake in time to film underwater. So most people went fishing, a couple went birding, and I tried very hard to get underwater video. This part of the river was in the big pool downstream from the main rapid. The water was a lot slower here and it was easier to get around, but there was also a lot of sediment making it difficult to keep the water clear, and there weren't nearly as many fish. As I moved into the deeper water, I started to see sections of rocks that had been cleaned off of detritus and algae. At first, I thought maybe this was being done by plecos, but I was wrong. These round, sucker-like marks that are being left on the rocks are being left by Prochilotus, big ones, huge tetras that scrape algae off of rocks. We didn't actually see any of the Prochilotus, but probably in the middle of the night there are hundreds of them in here. What I'm trying to find in all these large rocks are loricarids, specifically Chaetostoma, which this river has a lot of. There are other types of loricarids as well, but they're not easy to find. The only place in this large pool that I found any fish at all was in this very protected space between the boulders. That suggests that there might be some predators lurking somewhere. Here's a better look at the Prochilotus sucker track marks on the rocks. Each of these round mouth marks is about 2 to 2.5 inches across. These had to be some pretty big Prochelotus. Now let's move up into the fast water. Watch for fish, they go by pretty quick. This was one of the most difficult habitats I've ever tried to film in. This is the habitat that makes me say that for many of the aquarium fish that we like to keep, we simply cannot provide enough flow. And just in case you think I'm fooling you and there's actually no fish here, every time Alessandro ducks his head underwater, he finds at least 3 or 4 Chaetostoma. We try, very unsuccessfully, to catch them with seines. Also note that Alessandro has probably moved less than 10 feet up this river. Wait till you see everything he caught.
Okay, black spots. So Myersy probably. So Chaetostoma myersi most likely. Oh!
But look this one.
Yes, different.
Yes.
White spots.
This is como la que se cogió allá arriba. And look this another one. It's plenty different and maybe
The tiger stripes.
Yes. And look at this.
Wow. Here, let me
This
turn this.
catfish.
Oh, hey Jeff, where do you see this catfish?
That's just a lot more motivation for me to see if I can catch some on camera. See that flash of fish go by with a yellow tail? That is some kind of Prochelotus, a relative of the flagtail Prochelotus, but designed for fast water. I have no idea how Alessandro is finding any of these fish. I don't even see the dang things. Finally, some fish, but they're not loricarids. Nice habitat, fun to visit, but truly difficult to work in and catch fish, unless you're Alessandro. Here's a nice clear shot of those Prochelotus sucker marks. Here's a big Chaetostoma myersi, one of the more common Chaetostoma and a beautiful fish from this area, but they're hard to ship because they need high oxygen water. Check out the mouth on this fish. I love the pattern on this species, such a nice green with bright black lines and spots. Here is a different Chaetostoma with really small white polka dots. And a third species with little black dots on its face and black lines between the scutes. And I'm sorry, but I don't even know what genus this catfish is in. We stopped at several small streams on our way back to Villavicencio. Many of these locations were the same places that I stopped a year before in December, but now it's January. It is amazing what 1 month of dry season can do.
Right.
These streams were flowing, full of fish, lots of Apistogramma, corycats, loricarids, pike cichlids. They must all work their way downstream and follow the water as it drains out of these small tributaries. So we're going to have to go find larger water if we expect to find fish. We did find one large pool on one of these small streams that had enough water in it for Apistogramma alacrina to spawn. Watch here as she finds an older cichlid fry and chases it away. We did manage to find a larger stream and were able to stop for one last chance at collecting fish in the day. Here Jeff is throwing a cast net in relatively fast water, and he was catching fish. While they were doing that, I decided to get the underwater camera out and see what I could find in that big pool behind them. About the only fish that I can entice close enough to the camera to get a video of are these Astyanax species tetra. There are multiple species of Astyanax in this part of Colombia, so it's hard to say exactly what they are. Then Jeff had this great idea that we were going to throw a cast net over them on film, so if you watch closely you'll see the cast net hit the water, and you'll also see how fast these fish can react. He missed every single fish in that school. But that's not hard to believe when you consider that the most common predator for these fish are birds, so they're hardwired to see things coming from above. Jeff was able to catch a couple on the next cast. It's a nice tetra, but not a super flashy tetra. This location was not a total bust. We did catch this really cool freshwater crab. You definitely don't want to get pinched by this though. The riffle below the pool was full of this nice ancistrus, and several of those made it back home. And we caught a few individual oddballs like this weird catfish, a belly crawler pike cichlid, which is pretty common in this part of Colombia and a pretty unique fish, and one of the Farlowella species catfish that are also pretty common in this area. Not the best day for collecting fish, but we did get to see some interesting things, and we didn't come back completely empty-handed. Tomorrow is another day, and we head out in a different direction to see what we can find in the Llanos of Colombia.